Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our 22nd live online wine tasting. And tonight we are going to be tasting our best value wines. Now, there's a bunch of different directions we could go here, and I actually had a fair bit to choose from. Devin and I really come to this position from opposite ends. Devin just wants the absolute best wines in the store. It's like, oh, Petnat at $45, cool. And he is amazing at that. But we do occasionally need things that cost less than $20. I'd like at least a third of the store to be that, ideally. It's probably not anywhere near that yet, but we're getting there. Regardless, it's very, very easy to make exceptional wine if money's absolutely no object. It's a great deal harder to make exceptional wine on a budget. Let's start with the Gaudu Malbec Rosé, which I'm really glad I tasted beforehand because it's actually not as big as the white wine this evening. And let's dig into why. Let's just say for our own sakes that a good value wine really, really varies. Just because something is expensive doesn't mean it's not good value. I bought a $10,000 bicycle last year, which is insanity and way more than anyone should ever spend on a bicycle. But it was marked down from 15.5, so I'm fairly pleased with the value. On the wine side, I'm going to say anything under about $18 is very, very good value. And it's very difficult to do that when we consider where our wines come from, how they're made, what the taxation is, and how many different steps are involved. So we're going to talk about the rosé here in just a minute, but I want to talk about wine in Alberta very specifically for just a minute. Here in Alberta, it is very difficult to get wine as cheaply here as you might in BC or in Saskatchewan, and that's because it is a flat tax system. Every bottle of wine, table wine that you buy, that is under 16% alcohol, which, why are you buying table wine over 16% alcohol? But that's neither here nor there. It's all taxed at a flat $3.91. That doesn't matter if you're buying Black Cellar here at $10.95, or if you're buying a case of Mouton Rothschild 2000 for $24,000 or $25,000. You're still paying $3.91 a bottle tax. Now, that flat tax system does, of course, mean that versus BC or Saskatchewan, who use a percentage-based system, you're going to have a certain point at which growing the grapes, harvesting the grapes, making the wine, buying a bottle, putting the wine in the bottle, shipping it from the winery to, or shipping it from the grapes from the field to the winery, shipping the wine from the winery to a export port, putting it on a boat, shipping it across an ocean or across a continent, getting it up to St. Albert, having it put the Canadian compliant label on it, getting it down here. And then, of course, there's perhaps a negociant in France who is hired by, say, 10, 15, 20 wineries to represent their wines to North American buyers. North American buyers, and they get a cut, of course. North American buyers buy those wines. They show them to me. They make a cut. I'm a retailer. I do have to eat. We make a percentage. How do you do all that with $3.91 in tax and make something actually decent and drinkable at around $12? It's not impossible, but it's really screaming difficult. So there are, of course, shortcuts. We'll get into what those shortcuts are kind of when we talk about the Gorgo Custoza. Not that it uses shortcuts, but I do roughly have a idea of how I want this to go. So let's talk about the wine in your glasses first, and we'll get to shortcuts in just a second here. Aaron, I believe it's time for MapCam.
MapCam. All right.
So our Malbec Rosé this evening comes from the region of Cahors, which is down here in the southwest of France. Now this right here is the River Lot, and you notice that it crosses through Bordeaux. Now, Cahors is really famous as being a major home of Malbec in France. That's what it is best known for. They were thought of as being the inky black wines of France, and they really got attached to it, especially towards the end of the 19th century. And they actually were taking a portion of the grape must out, and they were actually boiling that wine and then adding it back to make the wines even bigger, even darker, even inkier. And while we think of Cahors now as being like super good value wines, you remember I mentioned that they go through the port of Bordeaux, or at least they did historically. Well, the Bordelais were absolute masters from kind of the 16th century forward of incredibly protectionist tariffs. Now, as you might have heard, stop me if it sounds crazy, Bordeaux does make some wine themselves. And all of their major competitive markets, at least for exporting outside of France, they were all up the river from them. And so they would put these absolute madness, like 100% tariffs on wines from Gaillac, wines from Cahors, wines from Madaran, everything up the river from them, so that everybody would buy Bordeaux. They could charge absolutely ludicrous prices for Bordeaux. Well, what about those cheap wines from down the river? Oh, those are actually more expensive. Why? Well, you know, those crazy guys down the river, they just charge whatever they want. So this scenario really does create this really interesting situation where we have these wines that have always been inexpensive, but they really weren't very well known because of how protectionist the Bordelais were. Now, Malbec, I'll be honest, the number one question I get with this wine is like, Malbec can be a rosé. It's like, well, yes, it's a green fleshed red grape that, you know, can be made into a rosé because you just do less skin contact. That's how you make, well, I was going to say any rosé, but let's be fair. If you joined us a couple of wine tastings ago, we talked about all the many madness ways you can make rosé, between the Saignée method and the Ramato method and just making it from a Teinturier grape. There's lots of ways you can make rosé. But the classical way, you take a green fleshed, red skinned or black skinned grape, you crush it just like you would any other red wine. You macerate the skins in this clear liquid juice because, of course, when you crush the berry, it doesn't bleed red, it bleeds clear. And then you just let it soak up some of the contact for about 12 hours, soak up some of that color, and then you run it off from the skins and you just bottle it as pink rather than red. Now, you can do that with any grape that has a green center and a red skin. Doesn't matter what it is. Your results will obviously vary. I don't know if I've ever had like a Tempranillo rosé that I was absolutely thrilled with, but you can do it with any grape that really meets those requirements. Malbec is just another grape that you can do that with. Now these cats are $17.95 on our shelves. I think you folks paid $15 for the tasting. It's appropriately dry, it's very earthy, it's very savory and meaty, it's got some nice minerality. This is a surprisingly big rosé. I had a real tricky time deciding between these two because the Gaudu here isn't showy. It's not over the top with aromatics and perfume and prettiness. It's not in that way, not like a Provençal rosé. When we talk about Provence, it's like, well, you get grapefruit, you can get lime, you can get like fresh like strawberry and fresh cherry and fresh raspberry. They're very showy, very aromatic rosés. This one is not. This is much more an earthy, round, dense, kind of mouth-filling, food-friendly style of wine. And until COVID, I think the Gaudu wines were really designed for a restaurant wine list. This was something that, you could serve in a restaurant at $8, $9, $10 a glass. And if you got served this and it was, 9 ounces and I got charged $12, I wouldn't be heartbroken. Now some of these wines, actually in some cases really interestingly so, have started bleeding into the retail space because of the fact that there really hasn't been the restaurant market, at least for a while at all, and then now at 50% reduced capacity, there hasn't been that ability to sell these wines that they used to sell cases and cases and cases and cases of into restaurants going around. So we're getting access to some things we didn't used to. I do still get some cherry and raspberry here. It's not like the wine is fruitless, it's just very serious in kind of an interesting way. When people said, oh, they make Malbec as rosé, and I said, apparently they do. Maybe the reason that we don't really talk about it is they make very, very austere and not desperately showy rosés, which is interesting because when you think about Malbec coming from Argentina, they tend to be very showy as reds. There's tons of white pepper, lots of red fruit, lots of black fruit. They're very big and in your face and expressive and powerful. And even like the local reds from Cahors, they tend to actually be even not as big as like a New World one because they just don't have the heat, but they do tend to be very big, very potent, very powerful, very showy reds. The fact that it makes a very subtle rosé, A, is good winemaking, and B, is very interesting. Thank you for everybody who said, yes, this is a perfect night for drinking wine. Thank you all so much. I am absolutely couldn't buy a bottle in the store for any money, sold out of the first 3 wines for this. Now, we did these over the summer, and obviously we stepped this back to doing this every other week, and we did that for a reason. The wine tastings were going very slowly. I think at our absolute worst, we sold 11 kits one week, which is still 4 cases of wine. That's still fantastic. But it was, way, way down from the absolute height of, the COVID lock-in, where we sold, I think, like 7 or 8 cases of each. It was an absolutely massive week. We actually sold like 3 cases of everything, and I only had 3 cases of the Gorgo, so we actually sold out of that. And then people still kept coming. They're like, well, can we get the rest of it? Yes, you can. And then we sold out of this, and then we sold out of this, and then we don't have that much of this left. No, it was wonderful. Hey now, did I say something about... I don't think I've said anything really controversial yet. I'm about to, but I don't think of anything super controversial yet. So that is one of the regions. Now, the point I wanted to make with this rosé, and what I want to talk about a little bit with good value as it relates to rosé, is Provence rosé, which used to be like the value rosé out there. It was the famous part of the southern bit of France. It made an excellent rosé. It's getting bloody expensive. Even like the big seller that I won't put on the shelves because A, I don't like it, and B, Costco sells it, is over $20 a bottle these days. That's kind of terrible for Provence rosé. Provence rosé was supposed to be like stuff you take out on the back deck. It was $15.95, granted 2008. It was just nice everyday patio wine. Provence rosé's kind of gotten a little bit of airs around itself, which I don't entirely approve of. So yeah, bit of a shame. Okay, so that was our rosé. Let's jump into our white wine. Now, if any of you say, well, this is the wrong order, you should have done the white before the rosé, there's a really good case for that, and I agonized a little bit about what direction I was going to do these in. This was ultimately the place I settled on, just because the Gorgo Custoza is so much showier and so much more aromatic on the nose that the Gaudu smelled very muted and it didn't really smell like anything. With this, yes, the mouthfeel is going to feel a little bit light compared to the Gaudu just because it doesn't know the tannin, it doesn't know that mouthfeel. It is still, I think, the better wine at this juncture. Oh yes, for those of you who haven't joined us in a week, I did get a haircut, and my wife says it's the best haircut I've ever had. So for anyone really curious, it was Skylar at Tommy Guns West on Saturday when I realized that I had to do the SAG Online Beer Festival, and I hadn't had a haircut since before COVID, and I wanted something I could get on 20 minutes notice. So I won't say I spent a lot of time on it, but they did, I think, the best haircut I've ever had. So, did I plan this out? No, but I did get lucky, which is just as good. Okay, before we get into the Gorgo Custoza, let's talk a little bit about what I talked about when I said shortcuts. So we have 3 wines here, and yes, of course, historically, as we always do, we are going to beat up on Apothecrat a little tiny bit because it's just traditional. It would feel weird not to. So we are paying $3.91 in Alberta liquor taxes. Now, of course, there are also import duties on wine, on liquid grape juice, on fermented bulk wine in tank, but those tariffs actually go down in quantity and in price as in the order I said them. So if you're importing a finished wine in a bottle, you will pay the most duty. Then you will pay on on fermented wine. No, I have that backwards. It's unfermented juices next. This is an agricultural product, and then finally bulk pre-fermented wine made in the local area, be it South America, South Africa, Australia, Western Europe, wherever. That, if it's imported in bulk, does tend to bear the lowest level of duty. So if you're trying to hit a price point, let's say $9.95, we know that $3.91 of that is provincial liquor taxes, so realistically you have, $6.05 that you can really play with. And then the retailer's got to take a percentage, and the local agent's got to take a percentage, and shipping and everything else. So you have $6 to somehow, satisfy a retailer, an importer, sales agent, and then all of your production costs, all of the shipping, all of the everything else. And that's how we kind of end up with things like Black Cellar Red. So this is a This is a wine. I was going to be so much meaner, but I'm just going to start with this is a wine. This is a wine made in Canada from a blend of domestic and imported wines. So yes, there is some Canadian-made fruit in here, and of course, as we discussed when we had Brett Rowland on the show, Canadian fruit is really, really expensive. It is new vineyards that have just been planted. You're paying Canadian laborers to harvest it, make the wines, and again, we're very, very far north. Like when you're making wine up here, like you're really on the bleeding edge of where you can make wine. It is not cheap to make wine here. But we have to put some in just to beat those excise taxes. So this is, I think, the required 25% Canadian fruit, and then everything else is Malbec and Merlot. Based on the fact it's Malbec and Merlot, I'm guessing it's going to be South American, just because of exchange rates and everything else. A lot of this stuff used to come out of the United States. Really strong US dollar right now, and just everything that's going on in the US right now is kind of screwing that up, so I would bet most of the juice for this comes out of South America. So it's a blend of some Canadian Malbec and Merlot. I would guess mostly Merlot because Malbec takes too long to ripen here. And then a whole bunch of Malbec and Merlot bought on the open auction market and exported up here. So we're going to cover the open auction market a little bit more when we talk about Yellowtail here in a sec. But suffice to say, like the idea of, a single farmer having his vineyard and going out and walking his grapes and then harvesting his own grapes, making it in a winery, selling that wine on, and having like someone to stand behind it. Yes, that happens. That doesn't happen very damn often under $20. I would say that this and this for sure are smaller operations that actually have some soul behind it. When we get to the Spanish Red, this is actually a huge syndicate that I didn't realize. Really excellent, shockingly good wine, but a bigger company than I thought. Anyway, this is basically someone went down to Chile or Argentina or Uruguay or wherever. They actually don't have to declare it on the label as long as it's 25% Canadian. And they basically went around and said, oh, I'm looking for Malbec, and I want to buy 1 million liters of Malbec. What's my price for 1 million liters of Malbec? Not shipped in bottles. They'll be shipped in like big, basically, PVC plastic tubs of a few hundred liters. But yeah, this is what I want to buy. I want to buy all of this, and I'm willing to pay X dollars per liter to have it shipped. Now, to buy that wine bulk in Chile or anywhere in South America is a lot cheaper than making that wine here. Plus, because it's, at least in part Canadian, you beat a lot of those taxes, and that lets this sit on the shelf at $9.95. Now, what if we said, okay, well, that's kind of soulless. That's a terrible way of making wine. What if we actually want all of the wine? It's going to come from Australia. It's going to say Australia on the label. Well, those auction markets are still there. Now, this has led to the idea of a brand that doesn't actually own any grapes or any vineyard, and in some cases doesn't even own a winery, but they own a brand. Fat Bastard out of France was the very, very first one of these. This came out of the big French wine ocean or French wine lake of the mid-2000s, where France was making absolutely buckets more wine than they could sell. For those of you who are part of the Languedoc tasting, we talked about this a little bit of being kind of that southern coast of France, where they make a lot of Chardonnay and Merlot and Cabernet and Shiraz and international varieties that everyone recognizes. They were making far more of that than they could sell, so it was sitting at these big commercial wineries, just in tank, finished wine. No one wanted to buy it. The wineries themselves, they said, well, we can sell 10,000 cases of this. We made 14,000 cases. Would anyone like to buy this other 4,000 cases worth of wine? So what Fat Bastard was basically a group of English business people who came to France. They said, well, we want to create this wine. It's going to have a hippo on the label. It's going to be called Fat Bastard. Isn't that cheeky? Stupid. And then they actually, well, stupid in the sense that they're all millionaires and I'm not. But they said, well, here's our wine brand. We're going to buy these finished wines out of tank on the open auction market, bottle them under our own name. We don't have to have a winery. We don't have to have any of that nonsense. We just buy wine, we repackage it with great marketing, we have an advertising budget, and away we go. That's exactly what Yellowtail did about 5 years later when Australia had a wine lake situation. And I will say, Yellowtail really did have an amazing following. I got to try Yellowtail in about 2008, 2009, I want to say. Might even have been earlier than that. And yeah, that was something where they genuinely were capitalizing on a great situation in Australia. There was a ton of really high quality wine. that Australia had made way too much. It was being sold for absolute pennies on the dollar. And I would say that for the first couple of 3 years, though, like if you bought a bottle of Yellowtail, that was probably a $20 bottle of wine you were getting for $8.95. Like Yellowtail was a huge cultural phenomenon, and it was kind of, I would say Fat Bastard started, but here at least, Yellowtail was the brand that really created this idea that you don't have to have a winery. You just have to have a brand. And then that's gone on with wine brands like Cupcake, like Bread and Butter. Very often they're food themed for some odd reason. There's the Location series, which I think these days is a Gallo property, where it's all one brand, but like this is Spain and it's like a Garnacha, and this is Italy and it's like a, I don't know, it's probably a Chianti or something. But yeah, they have this whole idea of like, we are a wine brand, we're not a winemaker. And that's kind of where this all came from. Oh, well, you're your own special case of Pothic Red. We'll make fun of you in a minute. So let's jump on to our next wine. And possibly my favorite wine on the table, and certainly the wine that inspired this whole tasting. So this is Custoza. Aaron, can we get to map cam?
Map cam.
So this right here, this giant blobby thing, this is Lake Garda. Now we've talked about Lake Garda when we talked about Valpolicella, when we talked about Teroldego, when we talked about Proseccos. This is kind of the big giant inland lake in northeastern Italy, that really does have a ton of really high quality wine growing regions around it, including Custoza. Now, one of the regions that we talk about in this area is Soave, which, if all of you are familiar, is my second favorite wine growing region, or well, it's not a grape. The grape is Garganega. Is my second favorite white wine of all time. I love German Riesling first and foremost, but Garganega or Garganega is number 2, and this is predominantly that Garganega or Garganega grape variety. The rest of this is made up with Cortese, which is a grape variety that, if you're familiar with it at all, you're going to be familiar with it for Gavi di Gavi, which used to be actually a huge deal in the 80s. You'd see it when I first started here in 2000s. We carried a Gavi di Gavi, and it shows up a surprising amount in like formal wine literature. I think it's just like wine writers are starting to like, okay, well, there's Pinot Grigio, there's Sauvignon Blanc here, and there's Grillo in Sicily, and they're like, oh god, another Italian white grape that's not Moscato. A Gavi di Gavi, that's one I remember. It's not really a huge deal, but it is the main home of Cortese. There was also Trebbiano di Toscana in here. Trebbiano is an interesting one as well. There's about 5 or 6 different types of Trebbiano out there, the most common of which is Trebbiano di Toscana. And then it's also a synonym for a ton of stuff. Verdicchio is called Trebbiano in 3 or 4 different places in Italy. And some of the Trebbianos aren't even like genetically related to each other. Trebbiano kind of, at some point in history of Italy, Trebbiano apparently became high acid, neutral tasting white grape variety. And everyone said, oh yeah, we'll just call all of those grapes that. We'll just call them all Trebbiano. And we're now starting to kind of sort out what they all are, but it's been a long road. I hope at some point we'll all decide, you know, there's Trebbiano di Toscana, and then we'll agree to call all the other things that don't sound like Trebbiano, because they're all genetically different from each other. And I'm not saying like just slightly, I'm talking like Chardonnay versus Pinot Gris different. Like these are different varieties. But anyway, so we have Garganega or Garganega, my second favorite grape variety. We have Cortese, famous for Gavi di Gavi, not really famous for anything else. And then finally we have some of our old friend Trebbiano. And it's magic. Like, it's got the complexity of the Garganega. It's got lots of richness. It's got tons of power and like really nice snappy acidity. The Cortese is giving this like this really nice mouth-filling, round, almondy character. The Trebbiano's there. Yeah, this is just lovely, everyday, wonderful, complex, interesting white wine that I think most people would just off the cuff enjoy. And I really, really like this. This is just absolutely lovely stuff. This was the wine that inspired the tasting, and I'm really glad I got to talk about it on the channel, because this is a wine that comes through Black Sheep Imports, my friend Warren Walden. brings us into Alberta. And sometimes Warren, he has a very small portfolio. I'd say all of Warren's wines combined can't be more than 40 different listings. And I've had most of them because we've been dealing with Warren about 5 years. I think sometimes he struggles to show us things because it's like we've had pretty much everything he's like brought in. Like I'm now at the point of like had it. Hey, I haven't had that. Bring that in. And I think that's how we got here. Is he mentioned off the cuff at a meeting way before COVID that he had this like Garganega blend, and he really wanted to show it to me, but like he didn't have any samples. I was like, well, I love Garganega. It's one of my favorite grapes. I have to have this, or at least taste it. So we got this like basically in a FedEx envelope down from Calgary because it was the height of COVID, and it was like, okay, for $17.95, this absolutely kills. It's from a tiny producer. The wines are exceptional. Oh, I mean, it's organic, it's biodynamic. Like, how do you not like this for like no money? Yeah, this really is on the keeper list for me too. Like, I really, really grew on this wine. Now, we are, of course, out of this because you folks wonderfully bought us completely out of everything this week. But yeah, just we are going to keep on with this, and I absolutely love it. If you like this, try Soave. Soave is this, but even bigger. If you're like, that's pretty good, but it's a little intimidating, Pinot Grigio is kind of the exact opposite direction. It's this, but just slightly lighter and a little less challenging. Start with the rosé there, Aaron, or the Custoza?
Rosé, please.
The rosé?
Yeah, thanks. I'm behind. Troubleshooting.
Well, I haven't had any trouble. Now, the Maturin's not fair. Actually, Vinebox. No Vineboxes this year, which makes me very, very sad. Do I really want to talk about this? Yes, I do, because it's mean and it's fun. So Costco apparently has a wine advent calendar for $100 for 24 bottles of wine. Now Costco's business model is its cost plus 15 for everything, so they're making $15 on that, so let's call it 85. Taxes on that, well, that's around $3.91 off to just $4. So it's on a half bottle of wine, it's $2 in duty. So on 24 bottles, you have $48 in duty. It's an $85 box their cost. So counting bottles, packaging, wine, shipping, marketing, everything, that's what, $37 that 24 bottles of wine cost to make, ship, package, and everything else? I have no idea what's in that box, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I can't imagine whatever's in that box is good. Yeah, I'm really confused by that 24 half bottles of wine for $100 wine advent calendar, unless they are saying to agents like, hey, give us this wine for nothing and it'll be a great marketing opportunity, maybe? But if it's actually based on what's going in the bottles, by God, I can't imagine how a 70-cent-ish half bottle of wine at most is going to taste. Sure, okay. Anyway, let's get on to our first red wine, the Vega Sindoa. This is our least expensive wine in the tasting, and I also think one of the nicest. I said early on I could have done this entire tasting just with Spain. Spain is stupidly good value. Their vines have been there for absolute ever. They're centuries and centuries old. Labor is reasonably cheap. It's very ideal growing conditions, by which I mean it's neither too hot nor too cold. In the places where it's bakingly hot, they know to plant the vines a meter or two apart so they don't die of thirst. In the places where it's reasonably water friendly, they actually plant the vines very close together. It's a very idealized place to grow wine, just like Chile, just like Argentina. In Canada, because it's always cold or windy or bakingly hot or we have forest fires or something, Canada is by and large a very expensive place to make wine, which is why we end up things like this that use some imported wines. Spain's not. Spain's very easy to make wine in. And as a result, like Spanish wine ends up being the best wine value on planet Earth is Spanish. Will we get a craft beer advent calendar? I don't know. All of these craft beer advent calendar things are all screwed up because of COVID and international shipping. So let's do the craft beer advent calendar TM. Those are a blend of international beers that have to come from all over the world to St. Albert, just outside of Edmonton. All of the packaging comes from China. It all arrives at the same place. It's remade in Edmonton. But if even one of those beers is late or doesn't show up, you can't really do the calendars. Same thing with, Scotch Advent calendars are a little different because, it's all coming from Scotland. But, wine Advent calendars or gin Advent calendars or beer Advent calendars or what have you, unless you're doing it all one country, it's all going to come from all over the world and be assembled in this market, in this world situation. Then it's not really doable because a lot of these facilities are closed or running reduced staff or behind. There's a massive aluminum shortage going on for cans, so a lot of the breweries are running into trouble. There was actually a beer seasonal for one of our smaller brewers that was actually just delayed because they actually couldn't get cans. It's a weird old world, so things like Advent calendars are tricky. Let's do our own. Now that's a fun thing. I actually have a conversation with Corey and Devin today about putting together our own wine Advent calendar between cans and bottles and seeing what we could reasonably do for like 24 one-offs of like wine or beer. But the issue for me is like, I don't have a box. And to get like a proper 24-pack box with all the like dividers and everything made, I don't know if I could even have that done before Christmas. Like it might be done Christmas Eve, but realistically with something like that, you want to be selling it November 1st, which is in a week. So yeah, I don't know if I could put something like that together. If you wanted to like come up with your own boxes and something like that, I might be able to put something together, but yeah, I'm not sure a wine Advent calendar is something that I can put together in the amount of time I have. We are going to be doing a Christmas case, though, which will be a dozen bottles of wine, very heavily discounted. We did them for years and years and years. We didn't do them the last couple of years because of how many Advent calendars came out, and they kind of killed our Christmas case numbers. But in a world without Advent calendars, we will be going back to the Christmas case. In years past, it has been 6 bottles of red, 4 bottles of white, including an exceptionally nice white for Christmas dinner, usually a nicer bottle of red for same, a bottle of dessert wine, and a bottle of sparkling for New Year's Eve. We will be doing another Christmas case. In years past, we did them for, I think we did one at $250 and one at $350. I'll be trying to hit those same price points if I can. Just time and inflation, it might be $275, $375. We'll have a 2-option Christmas case this year again. Been a few years, but we do have one again. Okay, so do we talk about the wine in our glasses first, or do we make fun of Apothic Red first? Oh, I'm weak. I'll pour myself a little more wine, and that way I still have wine in my glass when we get to talking about it. Let's talk about Apothic Red. We've talked a lot about Apothic Red for a channel that's literally never once tasted it on the stream. What I wanted to make the point of with this, and I'm trying very, very hard to be serious and not absolutely make a bunch of silly jokes that I could. Let's talk really about what Apothic Red is. We talked about the idea of importing juice. We talked about just buying juice in the open market and making it yourself. Well, what if you do own, or at least have long-term growing relationships with growers? Does Apothic Red probably buy some broad market auction juice or broad market wine? Sure. Yes, they almost certainly do. But this is made by Gala, one of the, if not the largest wine cooperative in North America, or wine company in North America, certainly in the top 3. I would venture to guess that they're probably number 1. They have been number 1 for a very long time. So they have the fields, they have the money, they have the buying power. But when you have that much land under vine, it's very hard to harvest at the right time. You're not sending out, when we talk about Germany, there's talking about sending out pickers in the morning and pickers in the afternoon and pickers in the evening to get perfect ripeness for every berry. They ain't doing that for Apothic Red. But okay, let's say you've harvested all your grapes over 2.5, 3 weeks. Your ripeness is a little all over the place. Well, that's where you can adjust everything in the winery. If the wine isn't alcoholic, you can add some sugar. If the wine's too alcoholic, you can use vacuum distillation, warm it up to about 25 degrees C, introduce a light vacuum over the top, literally suck the alcohol out of the wine as it vaporizes. You need acidity, add artificial acidification. It tastes like fake acid powder, put it in an oak barrel, put it through malolactic fermentation, that will fix that problem. All of those little tiny flaws, or in modern speak, giant glaring flaws, can broadly be fixed in the winery. Now, it doesn't really leave you with any sense of place or terroir or soul to the wine, but you can do it. And they do. So let's talk about the wine in our glasses, and let's talk about Spain in general. Now, I keep saying, oh, well, Spain's just this crazy good value. Well, let's talk about what this is. So this is a wine. Do they even put a year on this? Oh, they do. They didn't used to, but this is apparently a 2018 vintage, rich and smooth, Appalachian, California. Just go sit in the corner and don't hurt yourself. So this is wine from anywhere in a giant state. It's made to a rich, smooth style. They don't tell us the grape. They do actually now tell us a year, which is fairly new. It doesn't have any real quality controls on it. And it's, I don't know, I think you can get this as cheap as like $8.95 in like the Superstore flyer when it's on super blowout from the importer. Let's talk about Anciano Tempranillo 5-year, but on our shelves I think this is like $13.95 or so. Let's talk about Anciano Reserva 5-year. So this comes from Valdepeñas, so we know it's one tiny part of Spain. We do know it is Tempranillo, which in Spain I believe this is a 90% cutoff, so this is 90% one grape. It's made at 13% alcohol, and it's made in a very natural style in the sense that they haven't chaptalized it, they haven't artificially acidified it, they haven't really dicked with it. Is it organic or natural in the sense that we currently talk about it? No. But compared to Apothic Red, this is the most organic thing on earth. It's also aged 5 years. So this is a 2018. This is a 2012. This is why I think Spain's kind of insane. If I was to, put $5 into an oak barrel and then leave it for 8 years, I would assume that, it would probably, this theoretical magical oak barrel would bear some interest for me. No, this is a wine harvested in fall of 2012, sold in the fall of 2020. It spent 5 years in an oak barrel. This has never seen an oak barrel apart from the fact that, they oak it by taking some old oak barrels, turning it into wood chips, and then adding that into the juice in stainless steel. But this is a wine that comes from a very specific space. It's made under the Reserva grade in Spain, which has a whole bunch of really strict legal restrictions on how they can make it. It has a local history to it. It's from a single named grape, at least 90%, and it's 5 years in an oak barrel. And it's $13.50. I don't know how the Spanish make money. So, let's talk about the wine in our glasses. Come from Valdepeñas. This comes from a slightly more prestigious region called Navarra, which means it is time for map cam. Our last map cam of the evening, which is a tragedy. So, we are in the extreme north of Spain. Here is France, obviously. We are down here in Navarra. There is Rioja. For those of you who have been drinking, and there's a lot of you, have been drinking the Gainza Chacalina, it's coming off this northern coast of Spain, which is not a coast of Spain we really talk about very much, but we might at some point. So we have Rioja and Navarra. So in the 1860s, France had the Phylloxera louse, which is a nematode, and it quite literally went through France, and unless you pounded lead sheets into the ground around your vines, which some wineries did to save their winery and keep their local grape varieties alive, your vine was dead. It would eat the roots. It died. They came over from North America, clinging to the roots of North American vine species they brought over and transplanted in France just to test them out. So it's about 1870. Every vine in France is either dead or dying. So the French, who have all the money in the world and no vines, they basically go to the Spanish and say, so Spain, about your whole centuries-old winemaking industry that has its own traditions and history and everything else, how much would it cost for you to just forget about that and plant our grapes like Cabernet and Merlot and Shiraz and grow them in Spain, and then very quietly and totally complicitly with the French government at the time ship them up to us so we can still keep making our wine? The fact that it was Cabernet Merlot. Now, so they went to Rioja first because Rioja was considered the most famous of the Spanish wine regions. and the folks from Rioja basically told them to piss off. So they went to the region next door, Navarra, which had always been kind of the less sexy, less interesting, less famous region, and they said, so, we want you to completely bastardize all of your years of heritage and tradition and history and everything else, and just take a cheap buck. And they said, sign us the hell up. So that is how Navarra really came to be. This is 100% Tempranillo. Now, that was a very long time ago. This is not including Cabernet or Merlot or Shiraz or any of the major international varieties. This is Tempranillo, the thick-skinned, if you want to call it like the prestige grape of Spain, you'd be pretty right on. And again, like $12.95. This is an amazing, like, everyday wine. It's a great house wine for restaurants. I think in fact, I'll say the restaurant or bar in town with the best wine list in town right now has this as their, not a house wine, but it's effectively the house wine. This is stunning stuff for like no money. Absolutely love this stuff. And yeah, like, it's dry, it's well made, it's correct, you get complexity, you get real, like, tannin all over your mouth. It's got good acidity. It's a little tomatoey. If you're coming up and saying, you know what, I kind of get canned tomato paste out of this, you're right. But compared to Apothic Red, compared to Black Cellar or Yellowtail or even Anciano, this is heads and tails above anything else. And again, with $3.91 coming out in Alberta taxes, everything it's taken from the day that they like went out into the vineyard and like trimmed the vines at the start of spring to it being here in Lethbridge cost $8. That's insane. I forgot you had the Malbec Rosé as well, Dave. Thank you. You could also have the Custoza. Sorry. But yes, let us talk about what we have coming up next. And
Vega.
The Vega? Absolutely. So we have reached the end of our third wine, which means it is time to talk about what is coming up next. For one, as I have promised you, we have Sherry Week coming up. I have actually picked an Oloroso. I haven't ordered it yet, though. It will arrive in a week. Well, this coming Wednesday, actually. And that will be our very first tasting in November. But we have a couple of tastings coming up before that. Now, 1 week from tonight is the kick-off to Scotch Season 2020. It will be hosted by myself, it will be hosted by Lee Hansen, and it will be hosted by Andrew Lang of Hunter Lang Bottlers. They are the guys who make Old Malt Cask, First Editions, Hepburn's Choice, the Scarabus. I'm probably forgetting 2 or 3 because they have so many different lines. Ardnaho, of course, which I bought a barrel of. These are the folks who are doing our scotches for week 1. Now, we're not selling a package per se. I mean, you can buy a package. It'll cost you $412.84. I realize that compared to a $60 wine tasting or a $20 beer tasting, we're probably going to sell less packages. So, one, it's broken out. You can buy all of these individually. Now, you notice there's only 3. We're actually sold out of the 4th. For now, it'll be back on Wednesday. But yeah, we actually, the 23 Deanston at $170, we've actually sold all the ones we originally brought in. So obviously it's going to be a very fun tasting. We have the Scarabus Isla, which is a Kalila no-age statement at $52.95. We have the Del Ewan at 12 years old, which is a really fun distillery that I love talking about. That is coming in at $79.95. We have a Fettercairn 11-year at $89.95. And then finally, the Old Malt Cask Deanston 23-year at $169.95. We're making like $5 a bottle at most on these. These are just like pay our credit card fees, and that's really what we're getting out here. We just want you to come, taste whiskey, hang out with us. And the other thing I'll say is this isn't just restricted to people who buy the bottles or buy the kit or buy anything. If you've got Old Malt Cask whiskey at home, if you've got Oban at home, if you've got a bottle of Bruichladdich you bought 15 years ago, and you just want to come and talk about whiskey and hang out and learn something, this isn't going to be quite like these. I mean, to a certain point it will be. They're very rambling. We get off on ridiculous tangents, and we don't talk that much about the wines in front of us. but it's going to be more of that. This is going to be very, very open. It's going to be very much, if you like whiskey, we want you to take something off your shelf, or a couple or three things off your shelf. Try them, hang out with us, ask questions, because you've got someone who retails for a living and has been doing it for 20 years in me. You have someone who's been retailing, wholesaling, importing, brokering like independent barrelings and everything else in Lee Hansen. You have a guy who literally owns like a distillery and several different like independent bottling lines in Andrew Lang. If you've got a question and we can't answer it, damn, that was a good question. So that is coming up a week from today, but of course we have a beer tasting in between. Now that beer tasting is going to be our first of the snow beers because it is getting properly cold outside. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now I can't tell whether I'm being way too chatty and we have less questions because people are tuning me out, or if I'm actually covering more than I usually do and people have less questions because I'm being thorough. That last option is less fun. Please ask stuff because it makes it easier to do this. So yes, our beer tasting coming up on Wednesday is our first of our winter beers. From Snake Lake, we've been talking about this since we had Adam on in the summer. This is their Ice Cutter Vanilla Latte Stout. So lots of vanilla, nice coffee character, very, very big, fat, kind of wintry beer. Really looking forward to this. Cannery, second time they've been on the channel. We have their Darkling Oatmeal Stout. Of course, a few weeks back, we had their Okanagan Days Apricot and Pinot Gris Wheat Ale. From Establishment, we have their Munich Dunkel called Audubon. And finally, we have the Blind Man Winter Florida Weiss. Where the bloody hell is Coburn anyway? Guy hosts the show and now he can actually think he can skip out? Bloody Coburn, eh? All right, that's fine. That does make sense, though. He is like 90% of the comments, especially the funny ones. All right, so that takes us through Spain. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about the borderless protectionism and imported grapes and auction markets. We've talked about, Gorgo Custosa just because it is on its own a great wine. I will also say that wines from kind of northeastern Italy, they can get spendy, especially Amarones in particular, but there's a lot of really good value in this part of Italy. Like Tuscany these days, like even shockingly bad Chianti is getting up towards like $20 a bottle. This part of Italy, Verona, at least the lesser known regions, still kind of great value. And then finally Spain, always, yes, Spain's just good value. It's, just this is known. So let's do something of an oddity on the channel. Let's do something from the New World. So this is Best's, and I can say, without exception, this is a winery that we have worked with longer than any other winery in the shop. Now, if you've been hanging around the store for long enough, you may have been to a winemaker's dinner with Viv Thompson of Best's. We've had, oh God, probably 20 or 25 of the things over the years. And Viv is 88 years old this year, I believe, and he is one of those grand old men of the industry, and I mean that in the absolute nicest way. He's just an absolute gem. He's been doing this forever. He loves the Australian wine industry. He loves what he does. He's incredibly knowledgeable and respected within his industry, but for whatever reason, some of it by design on his part, his wines have never taken off in the way of like a Wolf Blass or a Hardy's or any of that. Now we'll also say, because that never happened, his wines have never been ruined by being bought out by a giant company and then made in the Yellowtail way of making wine and just buying wines to sell as much as you can under that label, and then it disappears. Now that is it's an interesting point with this particular wine. So yes, this is labeled as the Swan Hill Shiraz. Now Swan Hill is kind of a rural city of a collection of a bunch of smaller towns, including the small town of Lake Boga. In 2010, this wine disappeared because Lake Boga, due to an Australian drought, which was the lake that all of the vines were clustered around, disappeared. It literally dried up. It became just a dry depression in the ground. Now, the Australian government actually went through some pretty incredible lengths to actually dig a canal and refill Lake Boga with water again, and now again this area is making wine. This is what, an 18? Yeah, it's an 18. But yeah, this actual vineyard It didn't die, but when vines get very, very stressed, now you want vines at least lightly stressed so they make interesting wine rather than very bland wine. But this vineyard, the vines got so dried out and so stressed, they actually stopped producing grapes entirely. So this wine, which at that point was called the Best Grampians Shiraz, and if you really go back, it was called the Best Victoria Shiraz in the old days, it disappeared. And it disappeared off the market for about 5 years because after the vines got so shocked by that drought, they actually took a few years to recover even though they did have enough water. I imagine that they were probably harvesting that fruit and selling it off into, the open auction market, because if your name's not going to be on it, who really cares? But yes, this is a wine that disappeared. It came back. Why is this good value? Why this is the most expensive thing on the table, $18.95. Why is this good value? Well, it's because A, small Australian producers like Best are getting to be a bloody endangered species, and B, what's left of like the sub 20 Australian category that's not like Lindemans or Banrock Station? Heartland's over $20 now. Matilda Jester's like 25 these days. Silveran's over 20. Stuff we've JJ Hahn, which I think is probably the most interesting Australian line under 30, is like 26. Everything these days is over $20, at least if it's any good. The under 20 Australian category is just awful. Just truly, spectacularly, dreadfully awful. And it shouldn't be, because Australia is a huge country that makes a lot of wine. It shouldn't all be going into this, but there was a big collectivization movement in Australia from about 2001 up till about 2011, 2012, where all of the little interesting guys got bought up because they literally got offered so much stupid money to walk away that they couldn't say no. Best did say no. Quite famously, so did Yalumba, oddly enough, who's, I think, by far the largest independent family-owned wine industry in Australia. No. Like, there's nothing under 20 anymore that's any good. This is, and that's why I wanted to talk about it, because, Spain, famous for this. Italy and France, you kind of find these things here and there, Even occasionally I'll find like a Bordeaux white for under $20 that's spectacular. Europe's so fragmented and so tiny, and everybody and their mum has like a little tiny winery just kind of tucked in the corner. That can happen. Australia, I think, is really ripe, or at least I hope it is, for a good value wine renaissance, because the big guys have truly and spectacularly lost their way. Most of the small guys are all well over 20 these days. They're 20, 25. Wouldn't it be amazing to have something $18.95 that kind of tasted like Australian red wine and had some soul to it and some interest, and you could actually get out of here with a $20 bill and a bit of change in your pocket, and it'd be not bad? What a crazy idea. It's kind of nice to have these. I really like this wine. I liked it when it was the Best Victoria. I actually liked this wine way back in about 2000, 2003. I liked the Cabernet a lot better than I liked the Shiraz, but yes, I do like this still. So yes, that is our good value tasting. What are we looking at for time?
Pretty good.
Oh, pretty good. It's been most of an hour. I think that's pretty all right. I've covered an absolute mountain of stuff. I don't feel like I've shut up for the entire hour. I mean, that is broadly my job, is to, talk for an hour. But yeah, do we have questions? Do we have comments? Do we have thoughts? Do we have rankings? I have a lot to talk about with these wines that I didn't cover. Just, vagaries of time and how much I think anyone other than me would find them vaguely interesting. But yeah, we have more things we could say about these. So if you have questions or anything else, please let me know. Never gonna let Coburn live this down. We've had no questions. Bloody Coburn, eh?
And I'll give you my number.
I do want to talk a little bit of how much of a time capsule this is. Oh, I was going to talk about these. That's right, too. Thank you. It's a bit of a time capsule. It's still got a lot of that ripe, over-the-top Australian fruit. Yes, it does. But it still has oak, and it has interesting, like, black pepper characters. One of the things, and why I call JJ Hahn kind of like our premier sub-30 Australian brand, is JJ Hahn tastes like a time warp. I tasted Australian wine, obviously in my dad's house growing up. But I did get to try it really when I started here in November. And then for the next 5 years, when the absolute monolith that was the Australian wine industry was just rolling through Alberta and killing everything before it, it was like, we sold Australian wine and then everything else. And that's not really an exaggeration. It was Australia, and then everything was an afterthought after that. And then Argentina kind of came along 10 years later. But yeah, one of the things that happened with that whole Australian dominance is it kind of lost its soul. Australian wine used to be eucalyptus and aniseed and spicy and incredible, like fresh cracked black pepper, and it was so fascinating. And then at a certain point, somebody, probably Wolf Blass, let's just throw them under the bus, realized it was just easier to sell wines that tasted like fruit and oak and make them 14.5% alcohol, and that was all you really had to do, and nuts to everything else. And all of Australia kind of aped that. The reason that I really and to a point this does, I think it's better than a lot of its competitors, but I miss wines from Australia that tasted like what made Australian wines famous, that eucalypt and pepper and spice. J.J. Hahn tastes like a time warp in the fact that it tastes like an Australian wine from about 2001. Or at least what I remember 20 years later, an Australian wine from 2001 tasting like. That's why I really like them. The librarians vote Tempranillo. 4-3 didn't get 1-2 in time. Well, you know what? We had been selling like 12 to 15 to 18 of these. We had 35 full kits of everything to sell, and we sold out. Yeah, no, it was something. And yeah, we were shocked, just absolutely shocked. Can I recommend some other ones with the varietal in the white? So yes, the main varietal in this white is Garganega or Garganega. It is the driving grape in Soave. I probably carry 4 or maybe 5 different Soaves. It's really the only place in Italy that uses the grape. There are some plantings. When I was in California last summer, I got to try California Garganega. That was really neat. I've never seen a Garganega that wasn't from Italy. I will also say I can't get them right this second, but there's a line called Menti, M-E-N-T-I. They make orange wines from this grape variety that are not expensive. I think they're all under $30. One is still, one is sparkling, and I think one is barrel aged or amphora aged. They're all really good value. Those are also out there, not right now because they're sold out, but they will be back. But yeah, if you like this grape variety, Soave. Just Soave is the next step. There are inexpensive Soaves. The one I'd recommend is the Suavia, which is from a woman who makes nothing but Soave. She makes 4 or 5 different ones. They're all exceptional. I carry 3 out of the 4 at least. But yeah, Soave is kind of the thing here. The other major grape variety here is Cortese, which is just Gavi to Gavi. I don't have one because it's not 1998 or 1988 anymore. Like it's, yeah, I don't have Gavi to Gavi. It's an ancient wine that really is a wine textbook oddity for now. Let's say that, like, when we've talked about a lot of things on this, like Pet Nat was something that was in the wine textbook. You had to learn it exists, but nobody made them anymore. Maybe in 5 years, Gavi to Gavi will be sweeping the wine world. I bloody doubt it, but it could happen because Pet Nat did. So yes, Gavi to Gavi would be the thing. I don't have one, but it is a thing that exists. So what is the nightmare of Aussie wine? Sameness would be the nightmare of Aussie wine. Everybody wants to make something that's 14.5% alcohol or more. It tastes like fruit. It tastes like oak. It doesn't taste like a damn thing else. And that persists right up to the $100 a bottle price point. It's just more fruit and oak with a fancier label and like a handwritten number that it's 1 of 1,000, except it tastes exactly like the $25 stuff. I don't know. The Australian wine industry has kind of lost me in the sense that I should be... With Italy, I can tell, like within a couple 100 kilometers where something's usually made. With Australia, there's a whole damn continent that tastes, apart from basically the Yarra Valley in Tasmania, and to a point Western Australia with the volcanic soils, it all tastes the damn same. And it shouldn't, and that's a tragedy. 4213 and 21 for Deanne. Sad not to have the 12-pack for Kisses. We will have a 12-pack. Oh wow, there's so many questions. How many librarians? I don't know. What's my ranking? Ooh, what's my ranking? 1 with like a bullet. 2, and then I'm very torn. I'm torn because this is the wine that I would rather drink personally because it's more my tastes. But I think in its category, this outperforms it. So 1, 2, tied for third, heart and mind. If that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. It probably made sense. It's fine. I just saw Aaron ripping wires out of the audio equipment. I was like, oh god, what happened? But no, we have like the whole Moscato d'Asti scene, and I'll be honest, I love Moscato d'Asti. Like with a trifle or a tiramisu, Moscato d'Asti is like the perfect pairing. Doesn't matter if it's $12.95. Yes, there's all of the different variations of Trebbiano. There's some great Suaves out there. There's amazing. There's actually been a real push towards remaking Frascati, which is a style that almost died as being something interesting. Now there's tons of interesting Italian white grapes. It's just, you kind of get to this point when you work in the industry of it being Pinot Grigio, Pinot Grigio, Pinot Grigio, and Pinot Grigio. And occasionally someone else will like sneak in a trench coat and buy something else when you're not looking, and you're just like, thank you for buying something that's not Pinot Grigio.
So, Mike must have jarred the thing which put this side of the production out, which included the sound and all the. You're still live. You're still live. They can hear you now, I think.
Okay. How long did we lose audio?
Just for like 15 seconds or so.
Yeah, apparently we lost audio for 15 seconds. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate it.
You didn't mean to do it.
He didn't mean to do it.
I'll tell you what I really think when we're live.
Oh man, I'm gonna get torn into. It's gonna be great.
Anyway.
Here's a really interesting question. Have I ever tracked in a store how labels appeal to customers, what sells and what doesn't? If I could actually idea of what on a wine label sells and what doesn't, I would be much wealthier than I am today. I will say right now that on the shelf next to each other, Anciano, who puts obviously a ton of work into their labels and has these ridiculous like gold mesh label wraps, does not sell as well as Vegas Sindoa. Vegas Sindoa looks younger, maybe, hipper, brighter, more colorful. We sell probably 4 or 5 Vegas Sindoas for every Anciano. Sometimes for some parts of the world, especially France, if we have a very old-fashioned, very traditional-looking wine with like a fancy house on the front that may or may not have anything to do with the winery, it will sell quite well. If I put exactly the same wine out there and it has like, I don't know, a stylized rooster on it or something stupid, it just has like a very North American or Australian or Chilean looking label, no one will buy it. I think the customer has a very particular expectation of what they want when they come in, as they well should. You know, when I go into the grocery store and, you know, I want Heinz beans and all they have is bushes in them, probably tastes exactly the same, being a bit pissy about it. Really, I think everybody has a real expectation when they come in, and trying to nail down what people expect from a certain country, and if they're leaning more experimental or if they're leaning more traditional, and it has so much to do with it. You know, it could be as simple as like a Californian winery who's buying a ton of YouTube ads starts talking about French oak in all their YouTube ads, and then the wine is just absolute shit. And then anybody whose French wines look Californian or Californian look-alike, they sell worse for the next 6 months. Trying to nail down what sells on a wine label and what doesn't is very difficult. I will say A couple of big broad strokes notes I've said. Having more information on the label sells to wine nerds and literally no one else. On the front label, less is better. This is our go-to exception Malbec. It doesn't even say Malbec Rosé. I think you're kind of left to derive that on your own. All the rest is on the back. Like you've got the alcohol, you've got where it comes from, which is Côte de l'Hôte. They give you an idea of the serving temperature and everything else. That kind of belongs on the back label, at least for selling wine. If it comes from a famous vineyard, I think that's very relevant, but for the most part, more is less, or pardon me, less is more on the front label, and on the back label, more is less. Like, just give us as much as you can. Just running through this. Second one, we also did the Mother's Day tasting. How often do we do this? Good question, Justin. We do the beer tasting weekly because the beer tasting kept selling all the way through summer with no real slowdown. They just did really well for us all the way through the summer. So the beer tastings continue on once a week. We will perhaps be bringing back wine tastings back up to once weekly after Christmas if they keep selling as well as they did this week. Scotch tastings are going to be interspersed with wine tastings for the next few months, at least up till Christmas. We will be doing a champagne tasting on a Friday right around Christmas, New Year's. And then I assume, and this will be entirely based on how things sell, we will continue on doing wine tastings through the new year, either every other week or every week, depending on sales. So yeah, that is broadly how these things go. Anything else? Changing your votes. Yeah, I think we're about there, Aaron. I think we'll call that good. So yeah, we will make the announcement of what the sherries will be here. I think we're going to shoot the promo on Wednesday. It'll probably come out for the weekend next week. And then yeah, Scotch tasting on Friday, beer tasting in 5 days, and away we go. Thanks, folks. This was fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed anyway. Yeah, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. Oh, bloody hell. Yes, comments on Castle Garcia. There goes my wrap-up. We'll do that in a minute. Yes, comments on Castle Garcia. Vinho Verde, North Portuguese wines. They are in the extreme north of Portugal, where it is relatively cold for the Iberian Peninsula. Vinho Verde, it looks green in the picture. That's actually because the glass is slightly blue. The wine itself is not green in any way, but they are green in the sense that the grapes are underripe. They are harvested about a week, 10 days underripe to maximize acidity, maximize kind of tropical fruit flavors. They're very light, very sessionable, very delicious wines. If I was buying something in I just flew into Cleveland or somewhere, and it's like I'm in a wine store and I have $15 to spend, and the only person at the counter is like some 21-year-old person who has no idea what they're talking about wine, I'll just buy a Vinho Verde because they're always good, really and truly. The other one I brought to talk about was this Beach House. We slagged on some very big brands here. We talked about a lot of very small wineries here. Every so often, like a big commercial winery will absolutely kill it. This is the Beach House Citrus Grove Chenin Blanc. This kills. I like Chenin Blanc a lot. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you're probably really tired of me talking about how much I love Chenin Blanc. I think that's like $11.95 or $12.25 on the shelf. That kills for no money. I love that. Okay, there we go. We have gotten through the Castle Garcia hump. We are now into the home stretch. I think we'll call her there. Thank you all very much for watching. We will see you Wednesday or Friday next week. And if you're just here for the wine, we will see you for sherry in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton. This has been Aaron. Thank you all so much. We'll talk to you again.